Welcome to Decode, AI for Life Sciences and Healthcare. You're listening to our introductory series, Keep Talking About AI.
Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have Jeremy Sauer, VP of Strategy at Callio Therapeutics. I've been very excited to talk to Jeremy about where in life sciences AI will have the greatest impact, because I believe that he's uniquely positioned to answer this question. Jeremy's had an incredibly broad range of experience in life sciences. He's been on the management consulting side. And after that, he's been in various functional roles within biopharma companies of various sizes. He's been, before Callio, he was at Pfizer. Before that, he was at Seattle Genetics. And that spans the range of early stage biopharma all the way to large pharma. And I think that gives him a unique perspective. He's also been everything from a clinical scientist to being a VP of strategy. And that gives him a unique perspective on both the science and the business side of things. Jeremy, very excited to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to our conversation. Welcome to the show.
Wonderful, Sriram. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to kind of hit on this very kind of timely and important topic in biopharma.
So Jeremy, to get us started, where do you think AI is going to have impact in your day-to-day work? I know that you're an early adopter of a lot of AI tools. We've had conversations about this in the past. What themes do you think that you're most excited about with respect to impact of AI?
Absolutely. I think this is really like the question for the kind of the current age. As we think about this kind of emerging technology that's kind of revolutionized so many things and holds so much promise and, equally, if not more hype, how do we find where are the areas that can really move the needle today, help us do things better, faster, cheaper today, versus what are the things that we still need to build for the future? And so as I'm kind of evaluating capabilities and thinking about the types of work products that I'm trying to create today, very much kind of bifurcating into that sort of kind of what is possible today with currently available tools, and there is a lot, versus what is still not quite there and is going to require building. I've really appreciated kind of our conversations over the years as you are building up kind of actively building up solutions in this space, thinking about those types of problems, and happy to dig into any of those as the conversation goes.
Awesome. So you mentioned the reality versus hype point. What's your perspective? Is AI for real? We've all been through various technology waves, big data being the last one. I think somewhere in between there was also the metaverse. Where do you peg AI in terms of likelihood of impact? Is it for real?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely for real. I think about it in terms of waves of kind of market enthusiasm and technological innovation. And those waves are not always in phase and sometimes out of sync and differences in amplitude. And so in this instance, I think the market enthusiasm is huge and broad and wide. And I think, in every conversation, people say, oh, AI is going to solve that, or AI is going to take all these jobs, or something equally ridiculous. And I don't know that that's going to be the case in the immediate future. But I think what is the case is it's going to fundamentally change the way that we do work. And I think nobody knows exactly what that future looks like. And so it really takes kind of experimentation with the currently available tools to see what they're good at today. And then what are the areas that we still need to build. But I'm an absolute believer AI is for real.
Yeah, I want to come back to the what's possible today versus what we still need to build question in a little bit. One thing that I've been struck by is the market enthusiasm piece that you speak about. I have been surprised by how broad pharma's enthusiasm and adoption of AI has been. Historically, I've been of the point of view, and I don't think this is a particularly controversial perspective, that pharma in general tends to be on the more conservative side when it comes to adopting new technologies. But over the last 3 years, I've been consistently surprised by the demand from pharma for AI tools that enable them to do things differently. And something feels different about it. I mean, for the record, I too am definitely AI pilled, so to speak. I do think that it's for real. And I'm very, very excited about the kind of things that it can enable for what I view to be the very important industry that we are in. So aligned on that, let's get to the very interesting framing that you had, right? Which is this idea of there's this phrase gets thrown around, the jagged frontier. There are some things that AI is already amazing at, and there are a lot of interesting things that are possible today. But it's not uniformly amazing at everything. There are still things that uh, it doesn't do very well, and sometimes surprisingly so. Therefore, there's a lot of experimentation to do with respect to what needs to be figured out and built. Um, can you give us some examples of what do you think is already possible today from using AI to do work more efficiently and more effectively, and what is still on the other side of the jagged frontier?
Absolutely, absolutely. First, I just want to touch on, you mentioned kind of pharma's interest in this seems different than the past. And I think that really is an acute observation. Two things that can really come to mind, FOMO and herd mentality are very much a real thing as part of human nature. And I mean, there is such a momentum of force, of investment, of intellect, of noise kind of going in this space that you really can't avoid it. And also, I think pharma is by necessity becoming less risk averse. You can even see this in deal making, whereas it used to just be pharma would wait to phase 3 signal or late stage acquisitions, and given kind of competitive nature and kind of upcoming patent cliffs, there's a need to move earlier. And so I think this confluence of a broader risk tolerance with this kind of seeing all the noise around, feeling having to get a part of it. To your question about kind of what are some of those kind of jagged frontier applications, when I'm looking at a potential capability, I first go to like what are the fundamentals that would make or not or make or break kind of the success of a potential model. Model application. And so some of that's like the underlying data source. So do you have a rich underlying data source that a model can be trained upon, that it can kind of extract insights from? And I think part of it, I think a big win in the space, David Baker getting the Nobel Prize for protein folding, there's a massive amount of high quality, well curated data on protein structure, folding, that you can train models that can ultimately get really, really nice predictions on de novo protein sequences. Conversely, RNA, that we don't have those data, and that's arguably we don't have that kind of quality and rigorous assessment of RNA folding. So I think first at that kind of jagged frontier, looking at what is the area where we have a lot of good data to train upon, and then what's like a realistic, meaningful application that you could use some kind of model to extract an insight based on those data.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating point, right? So you're saying the jagged frontier is defined by having good data on one side and not having necessarily great data on the other side. I wanted to bring up the fact that 24 was the year that AI won the chemistry and the physics Nobel. You just alluded to it. David Baker, DeepMind, winning the chemistry Nobel. Do you think the fact that we have really great data on the protein folding side gets pulled through? I mean, one of the questions I wanted to get to was, are there approaches that you're seeing among at this point, more than a handful of companies that have been started with the premise of we will use AI to do discovery? Do you think AI and the first AI discovered molecule, so to speak, is that ever going to happen? If it's going to happen, are we 5 years away, 10 years away? Do you think it's already in the clinic somewhere? What's your prediction?
If I had to bet you $1, I don't think it's in the clinic somewhere, and I don't think that's a near term. And going back to the construct of having a lot of quality data, and thinking about it as like if you can a percentage of all knowable data, how much do we know about a given space? And if you think about biology, like I don't know what the number is, like 5%. I mean, there's a massive quantity of biology that we just fundamentally don't understand. So you see companies standing up to create in silico models of cellular behavior. There's certainly things that we can model. We understand certain signaling pathways and growth patterns, and there's probably some there. But I think the issue with kind of AI designed drugs is there's so much that we don't know. That I just don't know that we have that critical mass of data to be able to kind of meaningfully kind of move the needle. And the problem is those are kind of the sexy, shiny headlines, right? AI discovered drug, and it gets people really excited. I think it's actually kind of the boring applications. Like writing clinical protocols can take like 3 months. But we have a lot of protocols. You have a fairly structured kind of approach to what these things look like. Could an AI get me a protocol in the matter of minutes that's 80% there, and then I can kind of further fine tune it? I think those kind of operational, maybe less sexy approaches, I think that's where we're going to really see the near-term needle moving as we try to understand kind of more biology, or how much biology we need to understand to actually get an AI designed drug, whatever that is.
Yeah, fascinating perspective. I want to talk about both of those things, right? The boring operational stuff. I agree that that's where a lot of the short-term benefits are going to be. Let's talk about that now. I also want to come back to the shinier toys, the sexier pieces, because I was very intrigued by your framing, and the way I want to get into it is to ask the question of whether we should be thinking about creating data sets for biology differently to enable drug development. I mean, the LLMs that we have today are an accidental consequence of the internet happening and there being a large corpus to train on. That accident's not going to happen every time. Should we be more deliberate is a question that I want to get back to further downstream. But let's talk about the operational boring bits for a while. Yeah, completely agree that there's tremendous amount of operational efficiency that can be gained. And it looks like that spans functions. You can do it from everything from writing clinical protocols to drafting your entire regulatory package. There's lots of things that you can do on the commercial side as well. Any specific functions that you think are most primed for disruption here with AI?
Yeah. So admitting tremendous bias, but I think kind of strategy, competitive intelligence, a lot of things we've talked about that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts. I think that's kind of higher level than just operational, but I think similar kinds of things, right? We have a lot of good data sets in kind of PubMed, SEC filings, clinicaltrials.gov, a lot of these kind of available databases. It's still a problem of kind of structure. So like, how are these data structured? How do you get them all together in a place that can play well together? But that's an area that I'm thinking a ton about at the moment. This old model of hiring a bunch of smart people to sit at their computers for 12 hours a day to crunch numbers and make PowerPoint slides, kind of the old consultancy model, I think that has very few years left. I think the ability to parse large quantities of data and at the very least just kind of summarize in some sort of coherent fashion, but even extract insights and storytell based on it, I think that's well within the capabilities of a lot of the resources that I'm evaluating today. And I see that as a way to meaningfully make better, faster decisions. And I think that's going to be critical at every stage of the drug development lifecycle.
Yeah, completely aligned. I'm obviously biased, but I do believe that the superpower that's already available is extracting insights from large amounts of unstructured data. The LLMs already do that really well. They put structure around it, and then they're also really good at querying databases. So you can actually convert a lot of unstructured corpuses into much more structured, queryable information, which lies at the heart of the business development function, the strategy function, the competitive intelligence function, and a lot more on the commercial side as well. A very, very exciting space. Obviously, something that we've had multiple discussions about. I want to talk specifically about clinical trial operations. Do you envision that space getting disrupted? The way I think about it is the two big bottlenecks are probably discovery of completely new modalities. We spoke about that, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And then just uh, getting through the clinical trial process as quickly as possible. I mean, there's lots of data that points to the fact that that is a significant bottleneck. How long it takes, how expensive it is, how difficult it is to recruit patients. Do you think AI has a place to lubricate that process?
Yeah, yeah. I think it has to. I mean, if you look at kind of the expense of drug development, people, there's a lot of focus on developing of the drug candidate, right? AI designed drugs. Early on in the discovery machine, I mean, there's a lot of cost there, but it's maybe in the hundreds of thousands, maybe like low millions of dollars. You get into clinical trials, these are tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So purely from a cost standpoint, if you can realize incremental efficiencies there, major cost savings, and that cost savings allows you to do more research. But what I think is most important, of absolute paramount importance, is the time. Right, you look at the time it takes to get from IND, first in human trial, to an approval. I mean, you're looking at the better part of a decade. And for molecules that work, you want to get them through as fast as possible, parse that signal, understand dose, efficacy, safety, and get that medicine to patients as fast as you can. And for the arguably majority of drugs that don't work, you want to be able to get to that decision point to stop that program, so you can then reallocate resources to drugs that might work. I think it's a really, really hard problem, and figuring out where are the nodes to apply kind of AI force to that can make the biggest difference. One that I'm thinking a lot about right now is site selection and patient enrollment. There's a statistic out there that 1/3 of clinical trial sites activated will never enroll a patient. And so if you think about that, all of the time and money spent to activate a site, and if they could never enroll a patient, I mean, that's a ton of cost, it's distraction, and it's not ultimately progressing the trial forward. So understanding kind of patient volumes, patient populations, historical performance of sites, I think is going to be critical. I put that in kind of the underlying data is spotty, it's behind paywalls, it's proprietary, it's very poorly structured. A lot of it's behind EMR, so there's kind of HIPAA regulations. And so I think there's a lot of work on the data end that probably needs to happen before you can do a lot of kind of cool things on the model end.
Yeah, so that leads me to an interesting segue, right? So we've spoken about three kinds of data already. There is the data that is publicly available. You alluded to it, the SEC filing data. And that's obviously a place where there's going to be a meaningful amount of attention by virtue of the fact that the data is available. Then you spoke about the harder biology data, some of which is well understood, some of which is not. And now you spoke about the HIPAA regulated pieces of patient data that's sitting around in EMR systems. One thing that I wonder about is how much of the potential of AI in life sciences is going to end up being slowed down significantly by just broad accessibility to data. Firms themselves is another kind of data silo, right? I mean, if you are a large biopharma company, you obviously want all of your data to sit in-house, which means you then have to bring in the models rather than link out your data. And if you're bringing in the models, that's going to slow you down. So one thing that I wonder about is I'm a believer in the capabilities of the models themselves. I keep thinking about whether there are going to be other friction points that's going to slow down uptake within biopharma. And one of the friction points I keep thinking about is just data siloing. There's different kinds of data siloing, data maturity. What are your thoughts on that?
I think data is the friction point that I'm most concerned about. You look at the rate at which these models and AI capabilities are expanding. I mean, it's truly remarkable. The data problems, as far as I've seen, very, very minimal kind of progress there. And I think the progress that's needed is going to be very hard, right? Like, how do you make financial sense for these data vendors to, give up their data for a model to be trained upon, or, otherwise kind of make it broader access? Pharma company, obviously their proprietary data, they're going to be very loath to kind of make that public. And so I think data is going to be kind of a key friction point. And I think it both is going to kind of hamper the progress of kind of AI's utilization. But I'm actually worried about like the bias that it puts into the models in kind of current day. There's this allegory of like, if there's a drunk person at night lost in a parking lot, right? They're trying to find their keys. They're going to go where the lamppost is. And it's not because their keys are by the lamppost, it's because that's the only illumination that they have. And as you see all of these models training on kind of all the same data because it's easy and public and available, that's going to be the view of the world, not because that is the view of the world, it's just what we can see given the data limitations.
Yeah. Yeah. In a strange way, these LLMs are basically the biggest corpus for these is the public internet. And
Yep.
that's not a representative data set, to say the least, right?
Yes, yes.
I want to pivot a little bit and actually talk about how to navigate this world as a professional and
Yep.
how to navigate this world as a leader, right? So let's start as an individual professional first. How is it for you to live through this moment? Is it exhilarating? Is it discouraging sometimes? Like, how does it feel to go through this moment?
I think it's a pretty cool time as humanity that we get to live through this, right? I mean, we're really at this incredible inflection point, much like the Industrial Revolution kind of changed the way manual labor was conducted and its impact on kind of the market and the population as a whole. This is really changing the way knowledge work is done. And so as kind of a knowledge work professional, it's exhilarating, terrifying, exciting, all of kind of the emotions. I think confusing is probably a word you'd put as well. As you kind of, I try to every day talk with people working in this space to understand the capabilities being built and kind of what other smart people are thinking about. And there's just so much noise out there. And so it's really the issue of like trying to find what is that signal that you can bite onto today that's real. Parsing through a lot of noise that's frankly a lot of BS, right? So like, how do you find really what is the kind of the meaningful improvements that can actually kind of help us in progressing our cause, while discarding the noise? And so I think that's my biggest struggle is how do you kind of parse those two things?
And what are some heuristics you've developed to tell signal from noise?
Yeah, I forget where I read this, but somebody said like if you look at a pitch deck and you remove the word AI, does it still make any sense? And if it doesn't, maybe that's not a real thing. I think every company has become an AI company all of a sudden, whether it makes sense or not, whether it's real or not. And so is there some underlying value prop, some underlying problem to be solved, some realistic expectation that this tool could actually be used to solve that problem? Those are the types of questions that I ask. I think more broadly, I don't think we as humanity know the full extent of where all this is going to go. And so I think it takes a degree of experimentation. And so I think once you find something that you think is real, you have to trial it. And whether it's doing kind of a pilot use case or, getting access to trial a new capability, some things are going to work, and the areas that work, you invest more and move that faster. And a lot of it doesn't work, but, hopefully you learn in the process what's kind of the, fundamental framework that made it not work, and then apply that to future decision making.
How do you stay on top of just the rate of progress? I mean, things are changing every day. I think any given week there's new models, completely new modalities, new companies. How much do you do you feel like you're juggling two jobs? One is being your day job, the other is staying on top of all the developments, or how do you navigate that?
I view it as like a real existential problem. If you think about like the rate of knowledge generation in the world, it vastly outpaces my ability to generate knowledge for myself. And the absolute quantity of knowledge is obviously vastly more than I can contain. And so with that, every day I'm getting relatively stupider as compared to the available knowledge in the world. And in one world that's a little bit depressing, but I find it wildly motivating. For you have to be a lifelong learner, and you have to increase the rate of the rate at which you acquire knowledge. And so, going back to the competitive analyses, if it takes me 3 days to manually go through and read publications and create a table summarizing response rates across a competitive set. That's a fairly low rate of knowledge acquisition, and as such, a poor use of my time. If I can find a ChatGPT or other capabilities that can parse data, summarize, package it to me in minutes, my rate of knowledge acquisition has gone up quite a bit. So I think it's both a kind of philosophical bent to every day you have to keep increasing your knowledge, and how do you increase the rate at which you acquire that knowledge. I hope that helps, or at least that's the approach that I'm taking.
So your very humble aspiration is to become more stupid every day, but at a lower pace as time goes by.
Okay. That's correct.
That's a very interesting framing. So we spoke about dealing with this as an individual professional. You mentioned like existential terror as being one of the emotions. Excitement being another. That's definitely my experience. I feel like there are days where it's just exhilarating to see the magic that's going on around us, and there are other days where it is mildly discouraging to see these AI models do in minutes what it would take you days to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a magical time to be alive, and it's a privilege for sure.
A quick message from our sponsors. Pharma Agents is your instant knowledge companion for life sciences. Ask anything and get instant, accurate answers backed by trusted sources without information overload, unreliable data, or wasted research time.
How about structuring teams and leading through a time like this? That's another very significant question that I spend a lot of time thinking about. How do we, as a leader, I now assume that I have a team, all of whom are going through this fairly complicated emotional reaction to all of this technology and trying to deal with the space of change and doing their day jobs in a way that's acknowledging all of the possibilities that come with this. That's been an interesting challenge in and of itself. How has that been for you?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge beyond technical, issues and limitations. I mean, the human aspect of this really cannot be overlooked. And maybe we could bucket in kind of two buckets. So one is just change management. So for anything, you have to manage change. And, as a leader, we think, oh, we have this great new capability. It's going to make people's lives easier. I'll just drop it in and life's going to be great. And that's never true. You have to manage change. You have to set expectations as far as how it will be used, how work processes change. And so that's kind of standard change management, but absolutely critical. The one I'm honestly more concerned about, and I think a lot about, to some extent, people say like, oh, AI is going to take jobs. And it will take some current jobs that are being done by humans will be done by AI. And that workforce can then be reapplied to future problems. And so net, I'm very optimistic about the future of humanity and humanity's role in value creating work. But if you're a knowledge worker, particularly if you're like a entry-level junior analyst, it's very uncomfortable, right? Like you're essentially, in using these tools, you're trying to put yourself out of a job. And I think about that for myself, at my current level. How can I try to put myself out of a job so that I can be more efficient, and then I can then pivot to become something more value add? But it's very uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable. And I've worked on a number of initiatives where that was really a rate limiter, is getting people psychologically safe that we are here to improve the work, here to improve the process. We'll always take care of the people. But some people see this as, oh, AI is going to come from my job. I want nothing to do with it. And that's a hard human emotion to manage.
Is the emotion different or harder for you depending on where in your professional career you are? I mean, one question that I heard that was very interesting is, what is the worst age to be today, considering AI is happening, right? Is the worst age to be just getting out of college? Is it to be somebody who's been in the workforce for 10, 15 years? And conversely, what's the best age to be today, professionally?
Yeah. I think about when I left grad school and entered consulting, it was very formative for me to work 16-hour days doing awfully manual analysis and going through all these data, and it formed a lot of the way I think about things. That said, I would love to do that again in current day and use all of these amazing tools that could have helped my work. I think it's a bit of a yin and yang. I worry about what my career would have looked like if I hadn't had those experience getting really elbows deep into data, doing it all manually. But people coming out of school now are going to be vastly more efficient than I was. And maybe they'll still be able to kind of learn those kind of through the process. So, I think people worry about, kind of the coming out of undergrad or coming out of grad school, what does that look like? But I mean, I genuinely think the future is bright and there are a lot of opportunities, for those who are willing to kind of figure this out together as we all try and figure out what this future of humanity looks like.
Yeah, I think it makes sense today to have a smaller sense of identity. And I think the narrower you think of yourself as, the harder it is going to be for you to really embrace all of the possibilities that are enabled by this technology. So whatever professional you are today, think of it, I would say, in the broadest case possible. Think of yourself as a general purpose problem solver with an incredible array of tools that nobody ever thought were possible. That's a better framing than thinking of yourself as a person who does one specific thing.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think really like at the interfaces, at least throughout my career, I've kind of really focused at the interfaces. So I've had kind of a varied career with different, a lot of different experiences. And I've been trying to pick like, I am not the world expert in any one of the disciplines that I've kind of worked in or studied, but I'm very deep enough that I can have very intelligent conversations and either connect the right people or connect the right ideas, or be able to relate to the right people. And so I think the people aspect is going to be key. So soft skills, EQ, people have to have that. I think to be kind of relevant in the future of work, because as the brunt of the work itself, if it's done by machines, how you translate that to people, how do you build relationships in business dealings, how do you kind of network and find partners? I think that's going to be key. And yeah, I just have this idea about kind of interfaces, like how do you stitch together disparate ideas or areas?
Will one of the things that you need to be good at interfacing be not just with other teams and other individuals and other functions, but AI? I mean, there's a view that
100%.
all of our jobs become jobs about orchestrating AIs to get things done.
Yeah. I think one of I don't know if it's a new buzzword, but like agents and agentic AI. I mean, that is the hot thing, right? So to the extent that an AI is like one worker, you can have a workforce of agents, right? And so the way I used to plan my work or my team's work, I similarly have to think about how do I plan the work for my team of agents, and so how I interface, how effectively do I prompt, how effectively do I assemble kind of my cohort of technologies that I use? How do they play well together? Can they speak to each other? Can they share data? Managing a workforce, I think could look quite different in this new world.
So we spoke about it at the level of the individual professional, the leadership perspective. Now let's zoom out and talk about just companies at large, right? So how do you think companies are going to evolve? Do you think the pharma company of the future is going to be structured fundamentally differently? Is it going to be smaller? Are functions just going to evaporate? Are the way those functions going to interact with each other going to change? How long does it take to play out? That's in the future. Even today, how do you view big companies as being better equipped to deal with this moment than early stage companies, or do you think it's converse because there's a greater degree of flexibility, obviously, and perhaps a higher appetite for risk in smaller companies, earlier stage companies?
Yeah, that I think is a key question. I mean, obviously, smaller companies have a speed and flexibility advantage. We can just move so much faster and pivot so much quicker. I think the big companies are going to be helpful in this kind of interstitial time where we really don't know what's going to work, and they're resourced to be able to try a lot of different things. I think the key will be able to try things robustly enough that you can make a conclusion, and then be adaptable to stop doing what doesn't work and do more of what works. I think in an ultimate future state, it can't be a bunch of pockets of different AIs that aren't coordinated and it's not part of a broader strategy. So I think in my mind, the pharma of the future will be smaller, it'll be vastly more efficient, and it will have some sort of central enterprise AI strategy. And that'll obviously have different bits and pieces based if you're in medical affairs or commercial or clinical development. But I think it all has to be part of one thing. I think to get to that, though, it's going to look like this outcropping of, hey, let's try this small molecule chemistry AI, or let's try this trial enrollment AI, try all of these kind of things until we can find the use cases that work. But it's going to require speed and speed and being adaptable, which big pharma hasn't been the biggest strength in the past. And so I think to stay relevant, that's going to have to change.
So your model is there has to be a lot of decentralized experimentation in the interstitial time. And then when successful models emerge, you got to centralize it and scale it up across the company.
Yeah.
So I read an interview recently from I think Paul Hudson, the CEO of Sanofi, who said that you cannot delegate AI adoption in your firm. It was an interesting article. If a pharma CEO were to ask your advice on how they should go about ensuring their firm doesn't get left behind with AI, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're telling them?
I think it has to be core to your strategy. And I think everybody knows that it's core to your strategy. It's easy to say we're AI first, we're AI native, AI is our top priority. But how do you actually walk that walk? Like how do you allocate resources? How do you structure teams? How do you incentivize people and reward outcomes? I think it has to become a structural fabric of the organization. I don't think it can be this like layer on top that you say, oh, we've got this kind of AI initiative that we're interested in. I think you have to fully enable at every function to say, I forget what company it was, like if you wanted to hire a headcount, you had to have a written rationale why an AI couldn't do that work. Almost to that level of how do you truly bake it into every aspect of the company? And again, I think that future state of the company then looks quite a bit different. So I think it's going to be a transformation. So I agree. I don't think it can be delegated. I think it has to be absolutely integral to companies kind of that want to transform in this direction. And then companies that don't transform in this direction, I think they're going to get left behind.
If there's a biopharma company that's got a chief AI officer, are you going to look at that, and how are you going to update your prior on likelihood of success? Are you going to increase the likelihood of AI success at that company or decrease it?
Ooh, that's a hot button issue. In some sense, I think strategy and innovation roles kind of follow that as well. And I've held strategy and innovation roles, so I can kind of speak to this. I think you're kind of an outside troublemaker. So I go around to teams and say, hey, I think you have this problem. Like maybe we could apply this AI, or hey, I think we could maybe do this over here. And so I think having those nucleus of troublemaking, I do think that's important. But I think the converse where it goes wrong is it's viewed as, oh, the chief AI officers group, they do AI. I just do drug development. I don't do AI. I think everybody has to be a chief AI officer. And so I think having a specific function is helpful to have those troublemakers that are kind of in their specific roles. But I think everybody has to be empowered, and the expectation is set that everybody is going to be, to some extent, a chief AI officer for whatever realm that they occupy.
Yeah. I agree with the parallel for innovation roles and strategy roles as well, to an extent. For what it's worth, I'd decrease my prior with respect to probability of success if there's a chief AI officer today. And I think there's 2 reasons for it. I actually completely agree with your earlier point that the right play for this moment is actually decentralized experimentation. You're not yet at the phase of the journey where you know what you want to scale up. That's one. And if you don't know what you're trying to scale up, it's actually very difficult to give a chief AI officer the appropriate span of control and authority and decision-making power to make the kind of decisions that will lead to change.
Yeah.
I think it's too early for that role, which makes the management and leadership challenge harder, because then you need functional leaders, all of whom are fairly conversant in this technology and are able to drive change within individual functions. And what leads to success in clinical trial operations might not lead to success on the commercial side. So I actually think it's a very, very hard problem. And we spoke earlier about data being one significant friction point that will slow down AI takeoff and AI adoption and moving of the needle with AI in life sciences companies. I think the other really hard problem is getting the structure right, mostly because I don't think there is an easy and obvious structure. The right play for the moment is decentralized, but then by virtue of it being decentralized, for you to have uniform success across the firm, you need a lot of functional leaders to do something really well that is not their core skill.
Yep. Yeah, I
And
completely agree.
so
I'd be curious. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd be curious, how do you think about incentivizing this? You know, I think a parallel in drug development, the vast majority of things don't work. And it's, I think, a canonical problem is that we reward success. And if the vast majority of things don't work, it almost motivates you to take small, low risk bets. And I worry the same with AI. As we try a lot in this decentralized model, a lot of it, most of it may not work. Based on your incentive structures, people may just do very, very small, incremental, high probability of success things, but those aren't the things that are going to be best for the business in the long run. How do you incentivize that?
Yeah, very good question. How do you incentivize that? Takes me to what success even looks like, right? Another concern that I have is there is a tendency today to narrowly think of success as being synonymous with doing the same things, but in a more cost-effective fashion with AI, thereby completely taking off the table the ability to do things that you just couldn't do before. So yeah, part of my concern is I have an answer to how not to incentivize it. You know, don't just incentivize cost savings. There's much more that you can do with this that's beyond cost savings. I think greater velocity. You spoke about accelerating trial development timelines. If you're able to do stuff like that, that will be beneficial. So the way I would go about doing this is I would almost go back to the longitude prize kind of model, you know, where you used to have challenge problems and prizes associated with it. You know, as a functional leader, I would look at individual things that the function is tasked with achieving today and ask people, you know, set up open environments where there are open challenges to do the same thing at 5x the speed, or you know, half the cost, or demonstrate a completely different way of doing things. So I think what you can do is set up challenge problems and unleash the creativity of the entire function to solve those problems. It's also going to surface
You froze there for a second.
Yeah, it's also going to surface for you people who are really skilled at using these models to accomplish things. And I think that's another challenge that we'll have as leaders, which is the set of superstars in this new world might well be different from the set of superstars in the previous world. So yeah, challenge problems is one model for a firm to enable rapid decentralized experimentation. But it's easier said than done. I think a lot of the challenges in this moment are actually managerial and leadership oriented. And what's fun about it is I don't think there are too many easy answers. My tendency in moments like this is to go back and study some history. I've been studying the history of technology a lot more. Sorry, you alluded to the Industrial Revolution earlier. What can we learn from the Industrial Revolution? What can we learn from the transition into electricity, the transition into steam power? And there usually tend to be a lot of interesting lessons there as well. So
Absolutely.
no easy answers, but fun times as a leader because it challenges you on completely new dimensions.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to close out going back to the drug discovery question, right? So how do we what does the industry need to do when it comes to building data sets that enable us to accelerate drug discovery using AI? There might not be easy answers, but I think your perspective will be very interesting there.
One area that I don't hear a lot of noise about that I wish I did hear more noise about is the validity of preclinical models. If you think about where the fall off is in drug developments, we bring a lot of molecules to the clinic, right? We bring a ton, right? There's and once you enter phase 1, you have a 90% chance of failure. So, only 10% of these drugs will ultimately get to market. And so you see, where does that originate, right? Like, somebody thought it was a good idea to bring this molecule to the clinic, spend a bunch of money, ask a patient to take this drug to see if it works, and 9 out of 10 times were wrong. And to me, that rests almost solely on the preclinical models for efficacy and toxicity. How do we better, start with better biology, so we have better ideas. So I think hypothesis generation is a key area for AI to survey more literature, better understand the world to generate hypotheses. But how do you interrogate those hypotheses better preclinically such that you have a greater probability of success once you get to the clinic? I can do many more things faster preclinically. And so if I could stop programs because some model tells me that it's less likely to succeed in clinic, that allows me to progress ideally better IND enabling programs forward and increase that 90% failure rate. That we've been at 90% failure rate for as long as we've had data, right? I mean, it hasn't gotten better, and some recent data actually says that it's getting worse. The whole Aram's law and that sort of thing. So preclinical models is an area, again, I don't hear a lot of focus, but it's something I'm acutely interested in, and I think that's going to be a major needle mover for the industry.
Yeah, it will be fantastic if Aram's law is defeated with AI. It's
100%.
It's frustrating to be in the one industry that has the opposite of Moore's law weighing us down.
Yep. And it's only getting worse, right? And I think that's kind of intrinsic to Aram's law. And when I say models, I mean this can be like AI LLM models. I think it can be like mouse models, right? Or how do you use their current models, or how do you create better models? It's really, we have a hypothesis that goes in, and on the other end, I want what's the probability that this trial is going to work? And right now, we as an industry do a very poor job.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting work recently that I think it's called the ARC Institute is doing in building like a synthetic cell so that you can do in software what you need biological systems to do and do it at scale. Therefore, basically software gives you Moore's law. Therefore, you can accelerate development. It doesn't have to be LLM models. It can be completely different applications, which are all enabled by the fact that compute is much more accessible today in the first place.
Yeah, I think a fundamental challenge, though, you mentioned kind of like the in silico cell modeling, is just like the squishiness of biology and our relative understanding of all biology versus how much knowledge there is in biology. And I worry that it's fairly low. And so kind of going back to late night lamppost trying to find your keys, that virtual cell is going to be trained on our current understanding of biology that we know for sure is incomplete and is probably to some extent incorrect. I worry is that just going to be feeding back our own biases to ourselves. And I don't know how to solve that, right? Like, we need to understand biology better. How much better? What are the areas that we have to understand better? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I really look forward to the day where AI gets its third Nobel, and this one for medicine, right? But it looks like the fundamental limiting factor there is biology is squishier and harder to understand than some of the harder sciences.
Yep.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation, Jeremy. Parting shot from you, what's one piece of advice to anybody who's working in life sciences today that you want them to try to incorporate into their working model conditional on AI?
There's an old movie, War Games. I don't know if you ever saw that. Where at the end, kind of the parting line is the only way to win is to not play the game. I think it's the opposite here. I think the only way to win is to play the game. I think you have to try tools knowing that they're not there yet. You're going to try things and it's going to give you garbage output. You're going to try things and it may take you a little longer in the long run for your immediate workflow. We have to figure out where these things work to ultimately know kind of where to invest in the future. And so I think to ignore it and say things like, oh, AI is not there, or it's not real, or I can do it faster on my own. I think that's going to be the losing bet. And so I think trying. I think all of us, we have to try and figure out where this stuff works.
That's a great piece of advice. The only way to win is to play the game.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for your time, Jeremy. That was a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. And thanks for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. This was really enjoyable. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.
Great.
Thanks for tuning into Decode, our AI series on pharma and healthcare. Thanks to our guests for sharing their insights. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit ZoomRx.com and subscribe.